Hi, everyone, and welcome to the New Perspective and DWP briefing on Kickstart and the Kickstart scheme. So I imagine everyone's quite excited. I know I definitely am about the scheme. And so we might as well really get started. What I'll do is I'll just share my screen with you. Just some introductions. So my name is Hanif Osmani. I'm the Director of New Perspective Training and Consultancy. And we have with us Geraint Williams from Kickstart Policy at the Department of Work and Pensions. We're very honoured to have Geraint with us because I was just joking with him and saying a little birdie told me that he is in fact one of the national leads for Kickstart, which is fantastic. And just to say a very special thank you to my colleagues Rose, Nicola and Fusnara from British Land, because a lot of you were invited by British Land and one of those lovely people to come along and join us today. So the agenda for today is just a bit of housekeeping. We're just going to talk about the opportunity really briefly. We'll be talking about some of the details. Then really, how do we as employers capitalize on this, and how do we ensure that young people are supported as well? A few practical considerations, how do we really support Kickstarters through this program, going into next steps, and then an opportunity for Q&A. So housekeeping wise, we're hoping to finish at 5:30, so we've got an hour. It's a webinar format, so don't worry, we can't see you, we can't hear you, unless you want us to during the Q&A, and I'll come on to that in a second. So if you have a look at the bottom of the options, there is a chat option, which you can use just to chat to your fellow attendees, but don't ask your questions on there. If you want to ask questions, there's a Q&A option that you have at the bottom. You can ask that question, it pops up on my screen and hopefully Geraint's as well, and we'll be able to have a look and choose to answer that. If you see somebody else's question that you like, there's a little hand that comes up underneath, kind of like the Facebook hand, just click like, and then what that does is upvotes it. So we can see which are the popular questions and we'll try and get to those. And then if you'd like to join us live and ask your question and be on the video as well, just raise your hand during the Q&A, and then I'll come to you and just bring you on for a few seconds so you can ask your question directly to either of us. Just a little bit of background about myself, and hopefully in a few seconds you'll understand why I'm telling you this. I grew up on the Ocean Estate in East London, and it's actually was one of the most deprived areas in the UK. That building that's just popped up as a picture was actually one of the buildings that we used to live in. And I started my community development journey on that estate 20 years ago. And a large portion of those 20 years have been working on the employability agenda. How do we support people from disadvantaged communities to essentially get into work and start addressing some of the inequalities that they face? Recently, I set up New Perspective Training, which I'm the director of, and clients that we support include the Department for Work and Pensions. And the reason I give you that background is because I'm really excited about the opportunity that we've got around Kickstart. I think it's an amazing opportunity for employers, both private sector employers and those in the third sector as well, and young people as well. Many of those young people will be new to the labour market, won't necessarily have worked before, and it can become really easy to be deflated if you can't find work. And what a difficult time to be entering the labour market, or for some young people, unfortunately, who have been made redundant, what a difficult time to then have to compete with everybody else now to try and find work. And actually, it's very hard to find work if you don't have the experience and the knowledge and the skills as well. So I'm really excited about this. Feels like a real win-win for the employer and for the young people that hopefully they'll be taking on if it's done properly. And the last time we had anything similar to this sort of scheme was in 2009, and I'm old enough to remember that. And it was a great scheme and did some good. And I think this scheme is definitely building on that, and hopefully it's going to be even better than the last scheme that we had. So I'm going to hand over now to Geraint. I'll stop sharing my screen, and Geraint can hopefully fill us in from the DWP's perspective about the program. So over to you, Geraint.
Okay, thanks, Hanif, and good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Geraint Williams. I work in the policy team for Kickstart for Department of Work and Pensions, but my day job actually is I'm a service leader. So I look after the universal credit experience in the vast majority of South Wales, managing the job centre network there. And I've come offline in recent weeks to help the project to operationalise its intent, working from a work culture lens perspective across our job centre community who work with young people, but also from an employer community too, in terms of looking to engage interest to convert employers into the employer part of the journey, or gateways on behalf of employers for those that need that support. What I hope to do, I guess, over the next quarter hour or so is just to give you a bit of an update as to what Kickstart is about. Perhaps we'll use the vast majority of the second half of today's webinar in terms of a more extensive questions and answers session. But equally, I'm sure Hanif will share at the end of today's presentation my contact details, and I'm more than happy to work directly and indirectly to answer any further questions you might have. So in terms of Kickstart, what is it? So Hanif has just made reference there to a scheme in 2009. That 2009 scheme was the Future Jobs Fund, and it operated over the best part of an 18-month period and delivered 105,000 outcomes to work for young people aged between 16 and 24. In terms of the scheme that we're looking at today, the Kickstart scheme, it was announced as part of the Plan for Jobs in early July and launched for real on the 2nd September. So for those that have already taken the time, you will now be able to see quite extensive guidance in the gov.uk pages under Kickstart. The opportunity to see the application form as live, including some guidance as to how people put together a good quality form, and also the difference between what is an employer and what is a gateway organisation in terms of the employer aspects of support to the scheme. So in terms of Kickstart at its highest level, what we're talking about here is opportunities for young people who are on and claiming universal credit, aged between 16 and 24, who are currently out of work, so unemployed, in search of work, who are ready for work and are not competing successfully in the current labour market. So we're not suggesting that this is about young people who still need lots of support to become ready for work. DWP and its partners will continue to work with those individuals on a separate basis, developing what we hope to be a pipeline of readiness as we start to fill new jobs into 2021 too. And not for those young people for where a traineeship or apprenticeship would be more appropriate, and or those young people who can already compete successfully in the labour market that we have available to us now. But there are quite a significant number of people in the middle ground, young people who are ready for work, who may well have already had some experience of work, but because of the lack of opportunities in the current labour market are struggling to secure a foothold there. So what we want to do is to create placements for these young people. So it is work, we call it a placement, but in essence it's a job. The young person will become a worker and or an employee, and we'll be paying for those people who host placements. We will pay for that young person for 26 weeks, for 25 hours per week, paid at the relevant national minimum wage rate for that young person. And I'll come on to that in a little more detail shortly. So as far as the way that this thing works is concerned, to be an employer bidding directly, what we're suggesting is that employers must have a minimum of 30 jobs over the lifetime of the scheme. So that's not 30 jobs all starting in November, for example, but could be 30 jobs starting at any period over the lifetime of the project, right the way through and including the whole of December 2021, with any starts in December 21 actually concluding on placement in the middle of summer of 2022. So that could well be indiscriminate singular placements for 30 individuals or more, but equally could be 15 placements that are recycled twice, or 10 placements that are recycled 3 times in the lifetime of the scheme. So 10 starting in November, being replaced by 10 starting in May, June, being replaced by a further 10 starting in November, December, for example. And we think that the quality of the placement is the important bit here, not only because we give that young person a vital experience of work for 26 weeks, but the wraparound support that's provided either by the gateway organisation and or the employer adds to that ability for that young person to become self-sustaining in their own right in an unsubsidised manner. So developing their confidence and their competence through that experience, in the hope that young people migrate from that placement before the end of it into a less supported environment moving forward and as the economy generally recovers. So in terms of the employers, minimum floor of 30 jobs. If for whatever reason employers are not able to provide 30 jobs, then we are asking employers to work with gateway organisations. Now you may well have heard of these called intermediaries, umbrella bodies or representative groups. our Secretary of State has now sort of decided the word that we should use is a gateway organisation. So that is an organisation willing and able to work on behalf of other employers to harvest together a bid or series of bids, meeting that 30 threshold for jobs, and then acting as the go-between between the department and employers in terms of the way that we deliver the scheme together. So what we'll be doing in all circumstances is for every young person who starts work, on confirmation of work, we will actually be paying the employer £1,500 per individual. So that £1,500 would be paid directly to an employer where the employer is acting as an employer, or indirectly through the gateway organisation where a gateway is in place. And in those circumstances, the gateway will pay that money on, but in addition to that £1,500, we'll also receive a £300 payment per placement to help with the administrative and overhead costs for administering the scheme. At that point, in terms of the way that that employability support is delivered, that is down to the employer and or the gateway organisation to potentially look to collaborate to deliver as good a quality of service as we can do for that young person. They'll be in work, they'll be there for 25 hours per week, 26 weeks of the year. And what we want to do, I guess, and achieve over that 6 months period is to make sure that we can, through that £1,500 and through the expertise and the experience offered to that young person in the workplace, that we can enhance their abilities to be successful in the future. So what we'll be doing there is allowing that employer to think really flexibly. We'll be looking for that to be articulated in the bid in terms of the way that that money might be spent. But at this point, we do not believe that that money would be reconcilable in terms of having to account for all of that money in the way that it's spent to deliver the employability support. As far as wages are concerned, what we're saying is that we will pay retrospectively in arrears. Now, there is a little bit of a conversation going on at the moment, so I'll tell you as it stands. So as it stands, we will be paying through directly to an employer or indirectly through a gateway organisation. We'll pay quarterly in arrears for salary costs, on costs, and TPR pension costs for those that enrol to the scheme or do not sort of rule themselves out to the scheme more likely. On a quarterly basis. So the first payment for the first 3 months made at the end of month 3 in month 4, and the second payment made at the end of month 6 in month 7. Now, we do think that there is definitely feedback from organisations that suggests that the department would need to look to pay more frequently. And that's because of the potential for cash flow issues, particularly when an organisation is small or an organisation is taking on a number of different placements. So we have ongoing conversations at this point that is reviewing the potential for frequency of payment. Utopia, from my perspective, is that we pay monthly in arrears, tracking the RTI feed to confirm that the young person is still in work, is being paid at the given rate, and is working at least 25 hours per week. And then we would look to pay monthly, bi-monthly, or at this point in time, quarterly. So that is still to be decided, but I'm sure by the time any bid comes in from your organisation and or as a collective, we would have bottomed that out, and all of the detail which is still to be decided upon in terms of the way that the grant organisation will be structured will be more defined, and we'll be in a better place to help to talk to you about that in a bit more detail. So in essence, what we're thinking of doing and what we're aspiring to achieve is to help those young people who could work but can't currently compete to enter the workplace, to enter into a high quality experience that enhances their ability to compete in the future labour market. And we're looking to do that from November 2nd for the first jobs, last jobs entering work in December 21. We anticipate that we would like to help more than 250,000 young people into work, probably more nearer 300,000, with I guess the aspiration target being around 280,000. The Chancellor of the Exchequer set aside £2 billion to fund the scheme, but he's also being clear in his language that suggests that we should not limit our expectations by the pot of money that's been set. And if there is both a supply and demand need that outstrips that money, that we should look to push that envelope as far as we can. What we'll be doing as a department is work coaches in job centres will be identifying suitable and eligible candidates. We'll be preparing those people that are in a pre-work environment, and we'll be looking to match and refer people who are eligible for placements. And then what we'll be doing is hand-holding over that first couple of weeks of work, making sure that that young person feels comfortable, settles in well, sustains in those early weeks when we know that there's a potential for failure. And we are currently working up our thinking as to how can we then look to collaborate at a future point within the scheme to make sure that we get to, say, month 4 at some intervention point in the scheme where we can re-engage contact, working collaboratively with both the employer, the intermediary, the umbrella body, gateway, and the young person to make sure that we can talk about the potential for the placement drawing to a close, and to think very quickly about what are the steps that will be required that allows that person to make good progress in the real world. So I'll stop there, Hanif, in terms of just an overview, and I'm sure we'll probably have some questions that I can come back to in more detail if that's okay.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Geraint. So I think the first thing just for us to think about is how, as organizations, we are really going to capitalize on this opportunity that we have available. And so just thinking about this from an employer's perspective and thinking about your organization, if we think about the present, obviously there's a cost saving element here. I think everybody's thinking about, not necessarily replacing employees, but having additional employees that can really help to support what you do already and help you deliver your existing offer in a better and more efficient way. If we think about the future of an organization, I think we've got opportunities here to be very creative and think about how we can drive growth and utilize some of the skill sets that young people might have and their energy to do things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And that's something really that probably deserves a bit of thought. And also the opportunity now to create a future pipeline to talent. If these are organizations who, if you struggle to recruit, if there are not enough high quality candidates for the type of work that you do, this is an opportunity now for us to think about how you bring young people in, how you inspire them, how you start to create that pipeline for you and your industry going forward. A couple of considerations, I think, for organizations. Cash flow, as Geraint mentioned, is at the moment is paid quarterly in arrears. We just did some very quick math. And so if someone's in the higher age group, paid £8.20 an hour, that works out to around £900 a month. So if you're having to pay that quarterly, that's about £3,000, maybe even some of month 4 as well by the time the payment comes through. So potentially kind of, looking at around £3,600-ish if it's the full 4 months before you receive your payment. Something to bear in mind, especially if you end up with a young person who is in the higher age group. And also cost, actually. So the government are covering the national minimum wage for 25 hours per week for 6 months, and that includes the employer national insurance contributions and pension as well. But some employers are going to pay more and will choose to pay more. So either they might offer more hours or they might offer an increased salary. For example, a lot of organizations I know of are intending to pay the London living wage. And so that's £10.75 an hour, which works out to an additional cost of almost £3,000 that the employer will have to take on for every Kickstarter that they take on London living wage. So the cost is something very much to bear in mind. And I know there are quite a few employers who are intending to pay London living wage. So something to bear in mind. Now, if we think about it from the Kickstarter's perspective, if we think about their present and where they are, there's something to think about in terms of the timing of when you take on these young people, because we want this to be a really good experience for them, and the timing of that has to be right. And so will it be the case that you're taking them on and your organization, because of everything that's happening in the world, is working remotely, or will you wait until you'd rather have a few people back in the office and have more of a face-to-face experience? We really need to think about how we plan the work of Kickstarters. It's one of the worst things, I think, is when you take somebody on a placement and you haven't thought about what they're going to do. It can be a bit of a deflating experience again when you come in and people don't have work for you to do and you're essentially sitting there twiddling your thumbs. Do they have the equipment that they're going to need to do their jobs? And particularly with COVID in mind, if they're going to be working from home and that's what you're anticipating, do they have the equipment? Do they have the internet connections? Those sorts of things. Really think about planning out their induction properly and how they will be inducted formally into your organization. but also informally. Again, if they're coming on during COVID, how are you going to introduce them to colleagues? How are they going to become part and parcel of the culture of your organization? Think about the on-the-job training that they're going to need, and think about that in advance to make sure that the experience is really good for them, and think about mentoring. And so going into a workplace can be quite daunting. Usually there will be a motherly, fatherly figure who takes you under their wing and kind of shows you the ropes. Again, if the young person is going to be taken on when they're expected to work virtually, where is that support going to come from? So there's a few things to think about how you make the experience for that young person really valuable. And to be honest, with my background in community development, that's the bit that I'm really passionate about as well. Obviously, we want businesses to do well out of this and employees to do well out of this, but how do we make sure that this experience is just amazing for the young people who take part? In terms of their future, you as an employer need to think about the employability training. If you can offer them a job at the end of the 6 months, that's fantastic and amazing. But there is a chance that that might not be the case. And so they will need the skill set to be able to go out and know how to look for work and how to apply and be successful in that. There's a mentoring element. So, you might have taught them or you might have got some support for them around, how to produce their CV or, careers advice and those sorts of things. Sometimes a short course in and of itself isn't enough. They need some one-to-one support from a careers mentor to be able to give them a bit of additional guidance, because, if we can, we'd love for them to transition straight from Kickstart into another opportunity, be it an apprenticeship or an actual paid job, which means some work has to be done during the time that they're with you. And finally, I think there's an important element around pastoral care. It's daunting going into a new place for adults, let alone for young people. And there may be issues that pop up that oftentimes people aren't comfortable talking to the employer about. And coming back again to that concept of people working virtually, if they don't have someone to take them under their wing, or they don't have someone that they feel that they can talk to about some of the issues that they're going through potentially, that's not a nice experience. And so is there an element of external pastoral care that can be provided to young people? So just a quick thing about kind of new perspectives offer that we've come up with, and we're calling it Capitalize 2020. And there's two parts to it. So one part is an employability e-course, and it's going to cover quite a few things. So goal setting, because we want young people to really be clear about what their future goals are. Workplace behavior and culture, so they understand how to fit in with your organization, but any organization that they go into. The third one is something that I think is really important and a lot of people might miss, so I thought I'd mention it, which is creating a personal budget. If this is the first time that a young person has gone into work, or is potentially struggling financially, it's really important that they understand the importance of creating a budget and how to stick to that. I think there's a bit of a reality check as well. So we've got a module in there around challenges, opportunities, and managing expectations in the new economy. It is going to be tough. It is going to be competitive, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't keep their chin up and have hope, really. Exploring career options, understanding the job search process itself. We all understand the importance of social media and developing your professional, personal brand. And then the application process itself. How do you develop and tailor a CV, write a cover letter, put in a personal statement if you need to, and your interview skills. So that's an e-course with all of those modules that covers that. And then we have a mentoring package as well. So everything that they learn in the e-course, the mentor will support them with. So for example, if they've learned on the course how to develop a CV, the mentor will work with them to help them develop their CV, help them look at career options and so on. The mentor will also provide an element of pastoral care. So if there's anything that the young person feels that they don't feel comfortable speaking to their new employer about, they can speak to the mentor about, and that will be kind of strictly confidential. And the idea is to make them feel comfortable and confident, actually, that they can do well in the placement and actually perform better for you in your organization. And in terms of the balance, we thought an hour a fortnight for 6 months feels like a good balance. Every week is probably a bit too intrusive. They've got things to do. Just touching base for an hour a fortnight feels like a nice package. So that's kind of the package that we offer. And then if I just go into what the next steps would be, if you're interested in taking on Kickstarters, identify the number of Kickstarters and the roles that you want them to undertake in your organization. If you have more than 30, fantastic, over the lifetime. So then you can bid direct. If not, you'd have to find a representative like us or somebody else. There's a big list of people who are offering to be representatives, and you can get that from, if you go on the Kickstart website, government website, there's email addresses that you can email, and they'll send you a list of people. Provide the information required for the bid to the representative, and I'll just go through that in the next slide. When the gateway organization has 30 placements together, then they can submit the bid on behalf of the employer partnership, as it were. And then once that's done, it's into the recruitment phase. So once the bid is hopefully successful, the message goes, and Geraint will hopefully clarify this as well, the message then goes through to the local job centres, who will start the recruitment process and start making that happen. And so in terms of the information that's required, these are the questions that are being asked in the bid that you will have to answer, because the gateway organization has to answer these questions on behalf of all of the employers. So how many placements can you offer over the lifetime? Do all of your Kickstart scheme job placements meet the criteria that Geraint has kind of touched on? And we can go into that in more detail in the Q&A if you like. Are these placements just for the Job Start scheme? How will you support the long-term employability of young people through your Kickstart scheme? Describe the roles that you're planning to create. What information do you have to show that your job placements are just for the Kickstart scheme? And that's a bit more detail on the earlier question, which is kind of like a yes or no. And the idea is here that you have to demonstrate that essentially you haven't laid anybody off to take on these Kickstarters, and you haven't really, you're not delaying any recruitment as a result of Kickstarters, which is my understanding. And again, Geraint can correct me if I'm wrong. And then where will they be based? So they're the questions that you'll need to answer. Don't worry about kind of scribbling all these down. I will circulate this slide deck afterwards. So just in terms of contact details, there's my contact details and Geraint's as well. Again, you'll have all of those in the slide deck. And really now we're just into the Q&A. So use the Q&A if you'd like to if you want to ask any questions, or if you'd like to join us and ask a question live, and you'll have your video and everything turned on, then just raise your hand and we'll get you to join in. So let's have a look at what we have here. We have, quite a few questions. So let me bring these up on my other screen so I can see them. So question number one, will there be an answer? This is from Rose. Will there be an opportunity to select candidates for organizations, e.g. if we want to recruit Camden residents for opportunities at Regent's Place? So that's over to you, Geraint.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. Great question. Absolutely. So this is a competition. So the work coaches will be selecting candidates based on the specification that's set out by the employer, the job description, if you like. Obviously, the employer is still responsible for all of the normal legislative requirements in terms of the type of things that you can and can't include in the job description. So it will be your choice at the point of where a work coach sends you between 5 and 8 candidates for every one job that you have as to who you choose. You will put those candidates through the normal competition routes that you have in place for your organization, and you will select the right number of candidates from that competition in terms of moving forward. So it is an employer choice program. The bit about the potential for Camden residents for Regent's Place, then obviously that is tied up into legislative type issues around positive discrimination and or others. What I would say is that the choice will be yours. You will have 8 candidates. You'll be declaring where those jobs are to be. The work coaches in and around the Camden area, I'm sure, will be selecting candidates, and they'll be putting those forward, and you will then have full detail of those candidates as to which ones to best select from that selection. So that's probably the best way to answer that question, Rose.
I think there's a related question here. So Laszlo is saying, I'm an employment advisor at a charity. Would I be able to refer someone to the scheme if I had an employer arrange for a placement? So obviously, as an advisor, they're working with loads of young people. Can they refer them to an employer?
No is the answer, not at the moment at least. So the way that the scheme has been designed is that the work coaching Department of Work and Pensions holds the pen on that referral. So the vacancies are hidden from public view. So the way that this works is that you've just outlined, Hanif, haven't you, the way that the application is structured. At the point of where that application is assessed and is deemed successful, the secondary capture will be for us to gather the vacancy information in from the employers and from the gateway organisation. And at the point of where we have that in, what we'll then do is we will then profile that to be displayed with our work coach community at the time for which it is relevant in comparison to the recruiting timeline for that employer. So in essence, then what will happen is that will become live on work coach desktops. Work coaches will see it. We'll be able to look at their caseload. We'll do a geographical search for young people. We'll match for that, and we'll introduce young people on a voluntary basis. There's no mandation to the scheme, but it will be in conversation and in coaching from a work coach to the young person, who then introduces that person to the employer. Now, that's not to stop, in Laszlo's example, somebody who works in a charity who does lots of work with young people, some of whom will be shared people, won't they, from a universal credit perspective, raising awareness of the scheme and its presence, and having and prompting those conversations with the young person and the work coach in the job centre and or virtually to talk about, is this young person suitable? What jobs do we know that we've got coming forward? Can we advocate that young person is involved in that competition? So I'd see it as a collaboration from that perspective.
Yeah, so just to clarify, if because there's loads of charities who are very interested in this, they could essentially, if they're aware of the opportunity, they could ask the young people that they're working with to go and speak to their work coach at DWP and say, look, I've heard about this opportunity. Would you be able to put me forward for it?
Yeah, I think there's an element of control here, right? So we need to make sure that it doesn't become a bit of a fait accompli thing, if you like, right? So that the charity has engaged a young person, the charity potentially has placements as part of the scheme, or is aware of where placements might exist, and at the point of where they advocate that that young person then goes to speak to the work coach. I guess the balance will be is if it's just about do you know about Kickstart? Go and speak to your work coach. Kickstart might help. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. At the point of where it's, do you know about Kickstart? Do you know we've got a placement? We think you'd be great for us. To some degree, it starts to erode and eat into the potential for the work coach autonomy in both the eligibility and that sort of matching to referral.
Yeah, makes sense. So ultimately, the bottom line is it has to be a fair and competitive process, and DWP are the ones who will be referring people for the opportunity.
At this moment in time, yes, that's right.
Fantastic. Yes. A related question is, what information will DWP send across with regards to candidates who meet the specification, i.e. CV, cover letter, or a completed application form? And that's from Mark.
Yeah, I can see your question, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, so it will be what the employer requires and requests. So again, there are examples of the potential for online interventions for this, right? Where we can ask candidates to complete an online application. I think there's some complexity attached to that because of if that URL is in the public domain, then how do we assure ourselves of the fact that the young people that are clicking on it are both referred and eligible to the scheme? Because without us being able to track the referral, and that referral tracking is done through the universal credit system, that it then potentially becomes problems from an eligibilities perspective at the point of where we cross-reference. So what I would say, Mark, is that whichever way that an employer wishes to recruit, which could be from just a ask the young person to ring us on a number, to ask the young person to complete this application form and send it to here, work with our EAs in a job centre or employer advisors around batching together completed application forms or CVs or a combination of all of those things. Any way that an employer wishes to recruit is within the gift of the vacancy filling process.
Fantastic. I'm going to get the political question out of the way and maybe give you a hand with this. So the question is, why can't the government pay London living wage? I imagine if you were Chancellor and you would make that happen, Geraint.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the answer. The answer at the moment is that, and I do get the issue of it, and I do understand that obviously the mayor in London certainly has a charter established, as I understand it, that talks about the quality of jobs in London and the potential for adherence to the London living wage, and obviously the real living wage for those outside of London, and all such other things that exist. At this moment in time, from a legislative perspective, we are obliged to, from a national minimum wage perspective, to deliver for those under the age of 25. So that spans from a far lower salary for 16 and 17-year-olds up to the £8.20 for those aged 24. So what we're saying is it can be the prerogative of the employer to make up that shortfall if that's something that the employer finds important to them. But at this point, deviating away from that, from what I think is a very swift project delivering immediate intent to deliver within a crisis, is that we've gone for the NNW rates on this occasion.
Brilliant. The questions are really flying in now. Let's pick one here. So so this is from Julia. Will young people who have already completed an apprenticeship be eligible, or young people who have had some previous work experience, for example, a Saturday job?
Yes, they will. Providing they're not working now, the key is that they are unemployed at present. The fact that somebody has successfully completed an apprenticeship, a traineeship, worked previously, may well even have just finished university this year. Might be a school leaver with good or little by way of qualifications. What we're talking about is that all of those people will cover a vast spectrum of skill sets, I'm guessing, both in terms of the educational and the experience. But all of them are potentially at risk of being long-term unemployed because of what opportunities are currently in the labour market and the scarring effects that causes. So as a result of that, all young people from all backgrounds, with the exception of those that are pre-employment, and with the exception of those that we have confidence can compete in an unsubsidised manner, will be eligible for the scheme. And it's worth saying, I think it's fair to say that this year is probably the worst year, isn't it, to graduate from university, not least because of the lack of opportunities, but also the inability to travel around the world. And therefore, we do think that there will be a number of graduates with high quality experience and qualifications in the mix in terms of filling of these jobs.
Yeah, there's a really good question here around disabilities. So this is from Suzanne, who says, hi, I work for a charity that supports people with learning disabilities and autistic people. This group were the only group for whom employment rates were falling pre-COVID. How can we work with employers and the DWP to ensure they are able to access these opportunities, or ideally can opportunities be ring-fenced?
Okay, so I can just see that question. Thank you, Suzanne, for that. Yeah, we're not just for people with learning disabilities and those young people on the spectrum, but we think that it is important that we create opportunities for all underrepresented groups. So I think there's, so when you think about people from BAME communities, those people with language barriers, people with wider disability issues, a range of backgrounds, a range of additional barriers and problems in terms of entering work. We do hope that we can create enough placements that allow for those people to compete and to thrive too. Obviously, in terms, care leavers is a great example. Young people with learning disabilities and on the autistic spectrum, in terms of not having in all circumstances to work 25 hours because of other legislative issues. We definitely want to create opportunities that support those groups, those group of organisations too.
There's a couple of questions which I'll take from Mark and maybe put them together, which have to do with the roles and responsibilities of the Gateway organisation. One is, what are the roles and responsibilities of the Gateway organisation in terms of compliance, audit and liability? And the second part of that question is, what's the expectation for those same organisations around the administration of the £1,500 training budget for the component businesses within our applications? Okay.
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, great questions. Yeah, thanks, Mark. There's more detail to be had, I think, at this point around the finer detail that will be in the grant agreement, and that is still with our legal department. And therefore, in terms of the legalities aspect of it, the auditable aspects of it, I'm not able to give you a clear answer at this point. As far as the gateway organisation is concerned, though, right, we think it can be as simple as acting on behalf of employers to bid on their behalf, and then to act as the conduit go-between as far as the monetary transfer is concerned. So when you think of 30 as that floor limit, it could be as simple as saying we're going for 30. We will benefit from £9,000 ourselves. We will create 30 high-quality placements with a range of employers, and we will then pay out and on behalf of the £1,500 to support employability, and then retrospectively in arrears for the salary on costs and pension costs. Now, the £1,500 is a really interesting point, and I've started to see it be elaborated upon in terms of the way that that might be used, because in some circumstances, some employers might already have that infrastructure available to them to make sure that the young person can benefit from a really high quality placement. And in other circumstances, some of those smaller employers might find it really difficult, even with the £1,500 available to them, to make sure that they can provide that high quality placement on behalf of that young person. So what we're suggesting is that there is an opportunity to collaborate here. So in those circumstances where an employer needs help, not only to recruit, but in terms of the ability to provide a good quality placement, there is an opportunity for that employer to use that £1,500 really flexibly to add value to that placement. So that could be that they buy things off a shelf from other places, from employability provisions and other organisations that work in the wider sector in that geography, and they bring that service in to meet the needs of that young person. It could equally be about that there's a tighter collaboration between the gateway organisation and the group of employers. So the gateway organisation could have really good experience in providing that support. We certainly see that across the public sector where local authorities might bid, for example, and I'm sure private sector employers too. And in those circumstances, what we are saying is that the way that we think the grant agreement will be structured is the £1,500 will be paid to the employer, £300 will be paid to the gateway organisation. What happens in terms of the commercial agreements thereafter that then add value and deliver the placement value that we're talking about here will be for the employer to articulate in the application, and for the employer and the intermediary gateway body to deliver in terms of the programme itself.
Can I just ask a clarifying question there? So I was on a call earlier today with somebody, and they were saying they'd been to a few different webinars with kind of DWP reps, and they'd got slightly different sense of what the £1,500 should be for, and whether there were some minimum expectations around the employability support that had to be provided. So not just the kind of on-the-job training to make the actual work experience with the employer a good experience, but also beyond that to give the support that's kind of mentioned in the guidance around kind of CV support and all the things that we've talked about previously. Is there a sense of not necessarily how that 1,500 should be split, but is there a sense of what the minimum expectation is from the DWP around the wider employability support?
No, I don't think there is any. So obviously you would have read the guidance in terms of the potential for coaching, mentorship, leadership, immersement in experience, sort of providing opportunity, and then looking to make sure that all of that stuff is captured well as far as the the updating of a CV and the ability to use that as part of a supporting narrative at interview moving forward. It can be far more substantial than that, though. But equally, some of that £1,500 is to cover the overheads of that employer in terms of them taking that person on too, because we're paying, aren't we, to the gateway organisation £300 for the administrative costs. But inevitably, there are costs to the employer, aren't there, both in terms of payroll costs, recruiting costs, the time costs around leadership around some of this stuff. So some of that £1,500 is not just to be spent on the employability and wraparound costs for that young person, but is also there to furnish the infrastructure required to make sure that placement is a good placement too.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. a question from Naseem. Will there be funding for additional support costs towards a laptop, etc.?
Not in addition to the 1,500 and the £300. Yeah, what we think, Naseem, is that there's pre-employment activity that goes on that I'm sure Hanif will be aware of around what we can do around route-ways to work, right? Sector-based work academies, SWAPs they're now called, right? Other contracted and non-contracted provision. And also at the point of work, a work coach has available to him or her the potential to use a flexible support fund pot of money. So that pot of money is there to make sure that we can support that transition to work. And that could in some circumstances be about travel costs. It could be about PPE equipment that isn't provided directly by the employer. It could be about just clothing to make sure that the young person feels comfortable and can fit in within the workplace. In some circumstances, it does stretch towards technology, such as a laptop, but I would say that those examples would probably be quite few and further between.
Yeah. There's a great question here from Siobhan. Is it possible for a gateway organisation to employ and then place or second to other employers to mitigate the cash flow challenges that smaller businesses and charities might have?
Right, let me just think about that one. So is it possible for a gateway organisation to employ and place and second candidates to other organisations? Yes, the answer is yes. So this is quite a complex one actually, right? Because at the point of where a gateway organisation becomes the employer, right, are they a gateway at all? Right, or potentially do they become the employer and or potentially an agency in that space? And that's the risk to this, right? So understand the potential for cash flow issues. We've started to see a couple of these questions come in asking the exact same thing. And I think we probably need to take it away into policy and to work that one through. I think it sort of makes sense, but I need to manage against the potential for risk there, I think.
Yeah, fantastic.
Just to say on that one as well, though, Hanif, right? Yeah. The other thing to mention is that we've certainly seen under Future Jobs Fund, which is the 2009 to 11 scheme, that gateway organisations used the scheme to deliver the infrastructure for the scheme too. So if you think about it from the perspective of, the £300 is there to help with the administrative overheads for the gateway organisation, there is nothing stopping the gateway organisation also being a direct employer within that same bid. Mm-hmm. And potentially what that could do, couldn't it, is to add valuable placements where young people are being placed into a place that adds value to other placements through the orchestration of activity. Yeah. So, and that could be a quite a clear way of, adding jobs to the bid, but also then controlling the quality of the bid that you're delivering to.
Absolutely. It's actually what we're planning to do as well. So we're planning to act as the representative, but also as a business and as an employer to take on some young people and give them an opportunity and hopefully involve them in the scheme itself. Let me just have a look if there are any other questions here. I've got a couple of questions. There was a question here from Mitchell, which I didn't quite understand, which is how would you access cash flow? If you're still on here, Mitchell, I don't know if you want to give us a bit more information. I mean, in terms of accessing cash flow, it's the cash flow of your organization. So can you afford to pay upfront and then wait for payments to be made in arrears at whichever point that might be? So at the moment, we're talking about the £1,500 grant to the employer being paid upfront when not just, I'm assuming it's when the placement itself starts and not when the bid is successful.
That's right. Yes.
And then, so that comes up front to you, but there may be an element of that which might go straight back out the door if you're going to be essentially procuring the services of somebody else to deliver the training and employability support for you. And then the salary element will be paid at the moment, as it stands, as Geraint says, quarterly in arrears. And so does your organization have the cash flow to be able to manage that? Is something really to look at internally. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Geraint.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's the way that we see that. Yes.
Brilliant. We've got a few more minutes, and I had a couple of questions that were emailed to me. So one is from quite a large employer, and they were asking, is there a cap on the number of placements that they could potentially take on? And having seen the announcement on LinkedIn about Tesco taking on 1,000, my answer was no, but I said I'd ask the question.
Yeah, the answer is no. The bit for me is about it being proportionate. I think we talked at the start of today's call about the financial checks that will be undertaken, and we need to make sure that what we're seeing in terms of competition and requests for additional resource sort of correlate with the size of an organisation. But yeah, there's no upper limit in terms of that potential.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose, just to make that clear for people, the financial check is if you're a one-person company and you come to DWP and you say, I'd like to take on 300 Kickstarters, there might be some questions asked about.
Absolutely. Yes.
Fantastic. And then another question was around the organization being able to set some prerequisites. For example, would the employer be able to say they must have a driving license, for example?
Again, that is covered in normal sort of employment legislation as far as the job descriptions and what's required of that role. So in some circumstances, the answer would be yes, that would be permissible.
Yeah, but there's nothing from a DWP perspective, because I think where the question was coming from was, these are supposed to be opportunities for young people, potentially young people who have never worked before. And does that mean the employer has to take on whoever? We know there's a competitive process, but the Job Centre Plus work coaches can send whoever they want, or can the employer say only send me people who have a driving license because it's required for the job, as they would in a normal recruitment process?
In that circumstance, they can absolutely stipulate that fact. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, fantastic. Here's a question: is there a list of employers that we can refer to? That's from Juan. I'm not quite sure what that question means in terms of a list of employers. I don't know if you've got an idea, Geraint.
No, so the list of gateways are, I think you mentioned earlier, is published on gov.uk. I understand New Perspective Training is also planning to be a gateway organisation. We haven't got a list of employers that we're pointing towards yet in terms of definite interest. You mentioned Tesco's as one of those early adopters. We do know that we've got high interest coming through at this point in time, but we've not got anything for sharing in the public domain at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And then, like Geraint said, just to make it clear, there is a list of representatives that you can access as well. And I've had phone calls from all over, from a tattoo parlor and I think a dentist and a few other people as well. So it's great that information is available to people. Just wondering if anybody else has any more questions. We've got like a couple more minutes. I think we've answered most of the ones that are on here now. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, Geraint?
No, I think it's just worth reiterating. For me, this is a brilliant opportunity. I'm really grateful for the chance to come on and speak to yourself, Hanif, and to your colleagues. I do think that this is about Britain coming together, and the employer community is looking to respond in a time of crisis, to make sure that we can, I guess, develop the future, and to create placements for young people. I think you touched earlier about the potential for these jobs being new jobs, additional jobs, not displacing jobs, not feeling like a like for like on the redundancy front in comparison to what we've seen in recent history. All of that stuff would be absolutely true. We are exceptionally keen to work with all organisations of all shapes and sizes, and really grateful for the time today, and look forward to working with all of you in the future, really.
Fantastic. Well, good luck to everyone who's thinking on taking on Kickstarters, or thinking of being a representative, or even thinking of delivering training. I think it is like I said at the outset, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. The employability side of this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I think it's an amazing opportunity for employers and young people. So on that note, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you very much to Rose and Nicola and Fusnara for inviting everyone. everyone and helping to put this together. And last but not least, thank you very much for Geraint for taking the time out of his unbelievably busy schedule to go through this with us. Thank you very much. And hopefully I'll be speaking to some of you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.